Welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
It's no secret that coronavirus has had a detrimental impact on the UK economy and jobs. Some working in tax have been furloughed for prolonged periods, and some will be at risk of, or have already been faced with, redundancy. It is inevitably a difficult time, and I wanted to help in some way through the podcast to help those of you who are in an unfortunate position and need to look for a new job in an unprecedented market. So, in this episode, Georgiana Head, an experienced and well-known tax recruiter, joined me to explain from her experience what the current tax job market looks like, how it is changing, and to provide you with tips to improve your chances of successfully landing your next job. Georgiana first trained in tax, becoming ATT qualified and working for PwC before moving into recruitment. She works closely with candidates to help them understand suitable and available jobs, even if this is not for a role which she is recruiting for. She also helps them to increase their chances of being offered a job by improving CVs and helping them to properly prepare for interviews. Let's get to it. Hi Georgiana, thanks for joining me today and welcome to the Tax Professionals Podcast.
Hi Jack, nice to talk to you.
Thank you for joining me. So just to start off the episode then, to let people know what you do, when people ask you what you do, how do you usually respond?
Okay, so basically what I explained to them is that I trained in tax and then I moved into tax recruitment. And so it's a bit like running a dating agency. Basically what I do is I find jobs for tax professionals, and I also find tax professionals for clients. So my clients are very varied. So they range from the kind of big four accountancy firms through to the top 20 independent firms, law firms, and in-house departments of PLCs and banks.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone describe recruiting as dating before, but there you go. There's always always new ways to think about things. And if anyone's ever read Taxation Magazine or Tax Advisor Magazine, there's a good chance they've probably seen one of your advertisements in there, because that's where I first heard about you, just when I first started working in tax. Probably one of the more better known recruiters in the tax industry, I'd probably say. So in the episode today, we're just going to talk a bit about how COVID has affected the tax recruitment world and jobs available, and then also move on to some tips at the end. So from your experience with what's happened, what was the tax market like just before COVID hit, and how has it changed with COVID?
So it's quite annoying really, because at the beginning of this year, we thought this was going to be like one of our best years in ages, because in January and February, we made more placements than we had done in the 6 months preceding. And it was just really, really busy. And then obviously March hit. The recruitment market just kind of dropped off a cliff. And I've been doing recruitment for 23 years, which is quite scary. And I've been through several recessions before and things, but this time it did feel quite different, because first of all, everybody just kind of went, whoa, okay, we're not doing any recruitment. And then we started finding that, people who were due to start new jobs were getting their offers rescinded. And I've never actually seen that before in recruitment. So they were just turning around and saying, really sorry, there's no job there. We don't want to make somebody in our team redundant. So we're just pulling the job offer. And then the other thing that happened was other people who were due to start, from March to sort of June onwards, they were being asked if they would move their start date. So, to start in July, for example. And obviously that was causing issues because a lot of those people were on a month or 3 months notice period, and they were finding that, they'd end up with sort of 2 months of no employment.
Yeah.
So it was a very weird market, and I don't remember that ever happening before in previous recessions, I guess. Well, I guess it's the first time we've been in a global pandemic. So that's kind of, it's a new one. But then what we started seeing was people being put on furlough, and that caused some unrest, because obviously furlough only pays up to a certain amount, and then it's up to the employer to top that amount up if they can. So what we were finding is candidates who were perhaps at, say, manager or senior manager level, their firms weren't topping up furlough money, so they were finding that, maybe there was a £20,000 a year equivalent difference in what the furlough money would be. And they were really struggling with things like paying their mortgage.
Yeah.
So we saw quite a few sort of, people who were really worried about things and wondering if they could change jobs because they literally couldn't afford to be on furlough. And then we started seeing redundancies, and that's generally, what basically kind of happened between March, April, May to sort of early June, and then so I was doing things like you've probably seen on social media, dressing up my dog Hetty,
yeah,
crying because I'd never known it to be quite so quiet. I was like talking to candidates all the time, but all our clients were just really busy on just trying to keep their own work ticking over, if you see what I mean, and they just weren't working. And then as June started progressing, so as we got into late June, suddenly there started being jobs again, and it's beginning to pick up basically. So that's across industry and practice. I wouldn't say there's tons of jobs, but there certainly are some jobs again, and we're seeing some employers actually kind of taking advantage of COVID by trying to sort of upskill their teams and get some really good quality people in. It is beginning to pick up again. What will be interesting really is to see what happens when, as somebody put it to me the other day, the furlough heroin runs out. No, whether we're going to see a wave of redundancies, which I know we're going to, because clients are already telling me that there's going to be more redundancies. So I think there is going to be another wave of redundancies, but it does seem to vary. Some firms that seem fine and are carrying on recruiting, and then a lot of firms have just totally shut up shop and are just doing no recruitment at all.
Yeah. Well, definitely the worst of it is obviously the redundancies. I suppose at least when people on furlough, they had some pay, even though in some cases it wasn't enough for them to live off. But the redundancies are definitely the worst of it, which is one of the reasons I thought it would be good to do this episode now, to kind of help people who are in the worst situation and to help them to find their next job, basically. Because I'm sure that's one of the things you're mainly doing at the moment, is you're probably trying to help candidates more.
That's exactly
maybe that's more than clients, but at least more than usual anyway, probably, because you've probably got a flood of candidates and not many people wanting to hire them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of the jobs that are picking up, then where you're seeing people want to fill new roles, are there any particular specialisms or anything like that where you're seeing a demand at the moment?
I am. I'm particularly seeing, particular specialisms. So R&D tax, is that's the one area where there's people looking in the top 20 and independent practices at the moment. Transfer pricing as well. That's one of those areas. I mean, it's been a very popular area for the last sort of 10 years, but it's definitely still busy in comparison to anything else. I'm seeing less happening in sort of more mainstream areas like, private client or mainstream corporate tax. Having said that, what I am seeing in corporate tax is I'm seeing industry roles at sort of tax manager level. And what's happening with those is, it's usually because either we've got somebody is leaving or retiring or going on maternity leave or something like that. So there's a definite nailed on vacancy, if you see what I mean. There's a real big case for it. It's been signed off at the highest levels, and that's why they're recruiting, and they can't do without somebody at that level. So it's not particularly expansion. It's tending to be a replacement, basically.
Yeah, and more so for industry than practice, did you say, at the moment?
Yeah.
So I suppose it's a good time for people who would like to move in-house then, by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
So I'm presuming then, is this a little bit different to pre-COVID then in terms of the popular jobs at the minute? You said about transfer pricing.
So I say transfer pricing is just one of those ones, if I was talking to a new graduate at the moment who was, quite technically minded and, for example, and maybe done economics at A-level, I would say transfer pricing, because it's such a, it's been such a busy area, and it probably is the most out of all sectors of tax in the UK. So, that's been busy for ages. But, January and February, the jobs that we were filling were much more diverse. They were ranging from sort of personal tax seniors to things like, lots of indirect tax roles, mainstream corporate tax. It was kind of really a bit of everything. Another area that's strangely busy at the moment, and that's tax investigations. And I guess it's not surprising because, there's lots of changes going on within HMRC, and there's lots of technical reasons why people are very busy at the moment with APNs and things. But it's the kind of one area of sort of mainstream practice that's really quite busy.
Yeah. Well, I imagine just with all the furlough claims, because I know, for example, I'm dealing with furlough claims, and no doubt some other tax professionals will be doing the same. And HMRC is definitely going to start investigating those soon. So it's going to be an increase in that area. Is there anything different in terms of seniority? You're seeing roles at a lower seniority being recruited for more at the moment, or a higher seniority? What's it like in terms of seniority?
It probably is more, thinking about it. It's, say, for example, the jobs in industry are tending to be what I would call doers. So assistant managers, stroke managers, to do the compliance and reporting and to help more senior people on advisory work. I did have a series of big projects recruiting tax directors for one particular PLC, but that's kind of now finished, if you see what I mean. And the practice side, where it's firms who are looking to grow, and they're using this as I guess using the pandemic, as it were, to to their advantage, then they are senior people, but they're looking for senior people who might have a following. Mm-hmm. So partners or to even buy up businesses. It's that sort of market. What I have noticed is that there's very little at the very junior end. So I think it's really hard at the moment if you're a new graduate. I'm constantly getting requests from new graduates at the moment asking me for help, and I have to explain to them that most accountancy firms won't use a recruiter to recruit a graduate. They're much better applying directly, and that all of the firms' processes are around them applying directly. So quite often the first stage is to do psychometric tests online at the firm's website. So that's something you have to do directly. I'm giving people a lot of advice about which firms to apply to and how they go about it. But also, helping them rewrite their CVs. And I always joke about this, but it's kind of like the pro bono end of my work.
Yeah. I mean, CVs are a completely different subject in their own right, I imagine, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of employers who are looking to recruit, are you seeing any change in kind of what they're offering to staff or what they're expecting from staff? I imagine in terms of flexible working, for example, or remote working.
Yeah, that's been incredible, really. I feel like COVID has moved us on like 10 years and 3 months in terms of agile working. Yeah. So, a lot of accountancy firms were beginning to say, well, you can work one day a week from home if you're lucky, if you're at a certain level, sort of thing. And then, they were really, I think, anxious about trusting their staff with critical client data in their own homes. And then, with COVID, they've had to improve all their systems and work out ways of, making sure that their staff's home internet works and that that it's secure, and they've got access to the whole company system and things. And I think what's really been interesting is I've heard a lot of clients say that it's really suddenly become apparent as who's actually really doing the work, and that the people who perhaps shouted the loudest in the office are not necessarily the people who are getting the work done. So it's in some ways. So a couple of clients have said to me, it's really emphasise to them how much work working mothers are doing within the office. And that actually they're coming across really well in this way, because they're really good at multitasking and getting the work done in the hours that they have. So definitely seeing that. And what a lot of my clients are saying, then they're not necessarily going back to the office yet, or if they are going back to the office, they're only because of social distancing, they're only wanting people to be in a couple of days a week anyway, so that they can spread the number of people in the office over different days. And then one of my top 20 firms has actually said that they're going to use this to cut the size of their office space. They spend, for example, 40 million in office space a year, and they're thinking that they could cut that to 20 million as spend, and that they're actively saying to people, we really only want you in the office kind of 1 day a week, 2 days a week maximum. So I think that's a massive difference.
It is. And to be honest, I think it's probably a change for the better. I mean, there are times where going to the office is almost essential, but for me, for example, I've been able to just lock myself away in an office and concentrate on tasks rather than being distracted all the time with people coming over with questions and whatnot has made a massive difference. I obviously know that some people aren't as fortunate as me who have kids or, less space to work at home, and it's more difficult. But if you can get that space, I think it's great to work from home.
Yeah, exactly. I think the tricky thing is going to be new trainees coming in. It's interesting because quite a lot of firms have deferred their graduate trainees till February. And I think that's going to be the trickiest bit, really, A-level trainees and graduates starting and not being in an office environment. But I think already the firms have really got on board with remote learning, and, the way that they can do training courses. I mean, if you just look at the way that the ATT and the Institute of Tax have moved to remote learning platforms and things, I think that is going to be the way forward. Really interesting how, I'm on the council for ATT, and they are going to, because of this, they're literally changing the way they do exams, and everything's going to be done remotely.
Yeah. So a big change in jobs and the way people are trained. Yeah, it's got to be different for new people, isn't it? Not being around those that they're learning from and having to call people instead. That's going to be a tough one for both sides, I think, isn't it? The person who's their manager and also the person being managed.
Yeah. And what I do think is a bit of a shame is all that sociable side. I do remember it's really nice when you're a trainee and you've got a group of people who are all the same sort of age as you, and you socialise with them as well as work with them.
Yeah. So that's going to be missed out a bit on, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in terms of people who are looking for jobs, then, is there any place in particular where they should look now? Should they go to a recruitment consultant? Should they go directly to employers? I know you mentioned that graduates should probably go straight to the in-company, but are there any other advice around that?
Yeah, I definitely say to a new graduate or a school leaver, you need to apply directly, because basically at that level, an accountancy firm won't pay a fee, or a PLC won't pay a fee for somebody, so a recruitment fee. Obviously, as a recruiter, I would say, come and talk to a tax recruiter. But I'm also very honest with candidates. So what happens with me is I will talk to them about what jobs are actually out there and what we need to do. So, for example, a big chunk of my job is rewriting people's CVs and getting them in a much better state to sort of sell them, really, and sort of packaging them as a candidate and then putting them forward to the right clients, basically. And then I also do a lot of hand holding and help before they go to interview, in terms of interview preparation and what they need to do and what's likely to come up and all of that sort of side of things. So that's where I think I really add value to the candidate side of things. And really a good recruiter, will also tell people what other things are out there that perhaps they're not dealing with, or that that they need to go to directly. So, for example, in this market, for somebody who's been made redundant, one of the options is to look at HMRC. And I don't recruit for HMRC. Most of their recruitment is done directly. But I will always, if it's suitable, I will always discuss that as an option and show them how to apply and help them with it. Because from my point of view, I want somebody to get a job. Obviously, I'd like them to get that job through me. But the reality is sometimes they won't get that job through me and it will have to be direct. And it's much better for me if that candidate has gone away happy, knowing I've given them really good advice. They're much more likely to refer more work to me in the future from their friends or recruit through me, when they're employed again. So for me, it's about building long-term relationships, and that's really helping people, not just trying to do something for a quick buck, basically.
Yes. So basically, if you're going to go and use a recruiter, then I suppose it's making sure you choose one that can trust and is giving you the advice that's the best for you, and not just for them to get a fee on the other end.
Yeah, exactly. And from an employer point of view, the reason they use us really is to save time, because we've got a bigger database of, we're specialists in our field. So they know that, the person you're going to put forward is anybody you put forward could do that job and is suitable. And then it's what they're then interviewing for is really to check things like team fit.
Yeah.
So really it's a time saving method from their point of view, and also because we give them access to things like the ability to advertise in places like Tax Advisor and Taxation Magazine and Tax Journal on the online tax job boards. And that would cost them a lot more money if they went directly.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in terms of, you mentioned there that you help people with their interview prep and CV. So that's kind of a good way to segue on to tips to give to candidates in terms of their CVs and interview prep. Should we just start on CVs then? Do you see any big mistakes in CVs that you think are a massive no-no?
Yeah, I think CVs that are too long. So particularly if you're applying to something directly, a CV shouldn't be longer than 2 pages. It's a bit different when you go and see a recruiter, because they are basically going to make sure that CV is more in depth and really technical, and or they should do. And so that can be longer. But if it's a direct CV, it should only be 2 pages long. And really, there's 4 things it needs to really have on it. So your qualifications, your job history with a lot of detail in terms of your technical experience. And then the sort of 2 add-ons are if you've got management experience and detail on that, and if you've got business development experience and detail on that. But my personal pet hate is when you have a CV and the first half of the first page is just sort of generic skills. So saying things like superb communication skills, or highly resilient, which they're just too generic. Really, if you're going for a tax job, the reason why somebody wants to interview you is because you have technical skills in tax. So really, if you're in private client, for example, the partner within that team is going to be looking at your CV and wants to know how many clients do you have in your portfolio? What's the split? Are they all high net worth individuals? Do you have any trusts? Are any of them property clients? So do you do things like furnished letting statements? If you have trusts, do you do the accounting and the administration as well as the tax? Are they business owners? So do you sort of overlap a little bit with the corporate tax side? It's that sort of level of detail. How much is the split between compliance and advisory work? Do you supervise anybody more junior? It's that sort of level of detail, and some examples if you do advisory work of sort of recent projects, because they're trying to work out, can you fit the job they've got? And clients are time poor, so they want to see that really quickly. So I'd always say on the first page of the CV, that's where your education and qualifications need to be. And your profile shouldn't be waffly and going to sort of skill sets. It should literally say what you have done throughout your career. So, what types of firms you've worked for, what type of work you do, and then below that should be your sort of employment history. So, yeah, I'm quite passionate about what a good CV
well,
should look like.
You've seen probably thousands and thousands of CVs, so you've got you've seen plenty of your pet peeves probably, so easy to rant about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting because another thing's covering letters, because obviously nowadays most things are done by email. So most of the time you don't have that much of a covering letter. It's down to the recruiter to talk to the client about the CV. But if you're sending a CV directly, then your covering email does have to explain what it is you're looking for, and have a few of the salient points on it.
Yeah. So just coming back to the CV just for 1 second then. So you mentioned about kind of not having a separate skills section, but would you think it's a good idea for people to demonstrate their skills through their job experience? So to put the points under that instead?
I don't think you can have a bit of, like, I'll put at the end of the employment, history, I might put a small section on what I'd call competencies. So if somebody's already listed out their skills, I might put it in there. But I wouldn't, I wouldn't lay it out in terms of, communication skills and then an example of a project you worked on, if you see what I mean. I'd go much more back to basics of literally telling them what you do day to day.
I suppose some of that information is almost implied through your experience, isn't it, anyway? Listing it separately isn't going to give any additional support. In terms of interviews then, because I've personally found interviews quite difficult because you kind of don't know what you're going to get at. It's almost like an exam that you can't prepare for, or at least to some extent anyway. So what advice you have for people in terms of the interview prep and how to kind of tackle it on the day?
I think a lot of interviewing at the moment is done remotely first round, so by Zoom or by Teams or WebEx. So the first thing is you need to find a quiet space where you can make sure that you've definitely got good connectivity for it. Yeah. And even though you might not be meeting them in an office environment, I still think you should dress reasonably smartly. So, for a chap, I would say definitely a shirt, even if you're not in a full suit or anything, just so that you're looking, smart for that call, because they'll probably be able to see you. If you're, then second round is quite likely to be in an office now, because what we were finding is the whole process was being done online earlier on this year. So literally we'd have every stage of interview would be online, and then when people were starting, they were literally having their laptops couriered to them with all their logon details and stuff like that. So there's all these things that are kind of new. But what I've found in the last couple of weeks is that the first round is by done remotely, and then the second round they're asking people to come into an office and meet with somebody, and then even that's a bit weird because usually you have to like fill in a kind of track and trace form, and then you arrive at the office and you get shown into a meeting room by one person, and then quite often they'll then dial into Zoom to other team members because they only want people one-on-one. So that whole process is quite weird. And obviously you can't shake hands with anybody. A lot of firms have said to me, we can't offer them refreshments. So it kind of makes it kind of much more formal and much more stilted than it would normally be. But so it is quite strange. So I think the key to any interview is preparation. Make sure that you have really investigated the firm that you're or the firm or the company that you're looking at. Really had to look at what they do, look to their newsfeed, know everything about them. If you're going into industry, had a look at their accounts, and done some research on the interviewers, thought of some questions you'd like to ask them in advance, really had a look at your own CV and thought about what questions they're likely to ask you, thought about things like what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. One of the things I do with candidates is I analyse the job spec and tell them what the competencies for that job spec are, and then send them lists of potential competency questions so they can have a think about what's likely to come up in advance. And then there's really basic, simple things like make sure that they know that you want the job. I can't tell you how many times I've had situations where clients have said, really good candidate, I did really like them, but I just wasn't really sure they wanted the job, they just didn't seem that enthusiastic. And you're like, well, they've gone all that way to do that interview. They've taken the time off, off work to meet you. Clearly they want the job.
Yeah.
But it's because somebody hasn't actually said it. And so it is fine at the end of the interview to say, thank you very much for your time. I really enjoyed meeting you and I'm really keen on this role. I think it sounds, brilliant. I think it sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So, put your cards on that. If you want that job, sometimes you actually need to tell them that. And I think it's not very British of us. We're not very good at kind of self-promotion, and we're not very good necessarily at being effusive. But sometimes in a situation, you just have to be, basically.
Yeah, definitely right. Definitely a British thing.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things is don't humble brag. So that's quite an interesting one. There's a Harvard study about this. This is a new-ish phrase, humble bragging. So that's when somebody asks you about your strengths and weaknesses, don't try and turn a weakness into a strength, which is what people always used to tell you to do. Is be honest. Basically, if you're just honest and say, well, actually, I always have quite a messy desk, and don't say, but really, it might be messy, but I know where everything is, and really I'm completely in control. That comes across as much worse than just saying, I'm honest, I always have a messy desk.
Yeah. I suppose when you don't know someone very well either, to say something like that will just make them be a bit sceptical.
Yeah.
Whereas it's okay saying that to someone you know well, isn't it? I suppose it's back to relationships again, isn't it? Knowing what you should say to who and how well you know them, etc. Humble brag, though. Yeah, I didn't even think about that in terms of how we started doing that. Interesting, though, as you said about not turning a weakness into a strength, because I always personally found that a bit cringy, but it's good to know that it seems to be on its way out.
Yeah, exactly. So what this Harvard study, I think it was Harvard, it's either Harvard or Princeton, some big US institution, what they did was they showed people like 10 seconds of film without the words of people who were doing that. And basically everybody said that anybody who was doing it came across as shifty.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, actually. I can see that. Just in terms of research to do on the firm whose job you're applying for, I used to go, I think, a little bit too far at times. Like if I was applying for a tax job, I would look at like all their services. And when you look at a big four, say PwC or another one, they have so many services. So where's the line? Where do you stop looking? When should you stop trying to find out more?
I would say look at the specialism that you're interested in and what they do. And it's usually, you're applying to a particular office. So find out a bit of detail about that office and have a look in the news section to see if there's anything in there. I mean, it's anybody that you're being interviewed by, for example, have they done a blog on the website of that big four firm? Is there anything really obvious on the news about, say, for example, it might be budget changes or something legislation-wise that's particularly pertinent to your area of tax that you should know about prior to that interview.
Yeah,
that's on there. Is there anything on there about what they do training wise? And then, to be honest, in the careers section of the larger accountancy firms, they give you a huge amount of detail. They'll tell you things like what the values of the business are, and they'll tell you whether they interviewed those values, which is effectively a bit like telling you what the competencies are. So there's quite a lot of help and resources that you can find on their websites. The other thing is actually have a look at Wikipedia, because the Wikipedia for each of the larger accountancy firms is always quite interesting. What they say. I know a lot of people also look at Glassdoor, but Glassdoor it's quite negative because it's obviously a lot of people who've interviewed or had junior jobs in firms who maybe haven't had the best time, and then they rant about it on Glassdoor. So you've got to take Glassdoor with a little pinch of salt, I think.
Yeah, I remember looking at Glassdoor back when I was finishing university. It is people having a rant, isn't it? Basically, everything that's bad about the employer, nothing that's good.
And LinkedIn's a good resource because you can look at the people who are interviewing you, find out a bit of their background. see if you've got anything in common. Did you go to the same university? Did they, for example, if you're coming from a smaller firm, did they come from a smaller firm? So that can give you some ideas of what you might be able to ask them, like how did they find the transition to a bigger firm?
Yeah.
Did they do the qualification that you're looking to do? So, for example, are they both ACA and CTA qualified? If you're ACA qualified, can you ask them what it's like doing CTA? There's all those things where you can build rapport, but also get some information.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I just come back to questions for a second to ask the person who's interviewing you?
Yeah.
Because maybe I'm one of the weird cases, but I could go in with like 100 questions because I like to know absolutely everything. So are there any kind of typical areas where you should be asking questions that look good to the interviewer?
I think generally it's just showing enthusiasm, really. So, the typical sort of things you might do is ask about the sort of client base within that department. And I think one that's interesting to know is to say, well, can you give me an example of the sort of work that you've done over the last couple of weeks to show me what happens in the department day to day? So that's always quite interesting. People will tend to ask about things like, what's your training like, and what's the culture of the firm like? Well, to be honest, the culture of the firm you should get some ideas for that on the website anyway. And that's a sort of, what you don't want to ask is something that's so incredibly open, and it might vary from person to person as to what they think anyway. So those questions don't really come across very well. I think questions that come across well are where you've already done your research on the business and you've done research on the people who are interviewing you, and you've got a particular one that's pertinent to that department or that person.
So by the sounds of it as well then, so ask questions that you can get a factual answer to and not something that's subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting one. So just on LinkedIn for a second, do you think there's any way that candidates can utilize LinkedIn to increase their chances of getting a job? Do you think having a good profile helps, for example?
I think having a good profile helps. I think, you see, I kind of love LinkedIn and I kind of hate it. So because of the fact that obviously people use it to constantly headhunt people from it. We don't headhunt. We advertise. People come to us rather than just sort of randomly contacting people out of the blue who aren't necessarily actively looking. So as soon as you put yourself onto social media like that, you're sort of a target to be headhunted. So you need to think about all your notifications and what you've got on and things. But I do think it's quite a critical tool nowadays for business, and it is quite often the first way that somebody will contact you. So from a business point of view, and I think most of my clients will now check out a candidate online before they interview them. So they'll have a look to see whether they've got a LinkedIn profile, to see if it's, for example, HR people will do it to check that your CV is the same as your LinkedIn profile, so that you haven't, for example, taken a job off of your CV. So I think it is a good thing to have. And if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, it kind of makes you look slightly like a dinosaur, I think, in this at the moment. I kind of think it's a bit of a necessary evil. But I think social media as a whole is something you've got to be really careful of, because people will Google you to check your background. So, you've got to think what's going to come up on Google, what other forms of social media will they have access to. So, for example, if you've got a much more jokey Facebook and you don't use it for work, then you need to look at your settings so that you've got all your privacy settings on, so they're not going to be able to scroll back 4 years to see that, dodgy joke you put on there that really you would never have put on there.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
You kind of got to really think about it.
Is there anything that you think you can stick on LinkedIn then, for example, that would be a put off for an employer? Anything in particular come to mind there?
I don't think so. I think, I guess, I think the secret with LinkedIn is LinkedIn's used for business. For me, Facebook is more social. So for LinkedIn, you should only ever post something that you would be happy for your clients or your boss to read. So it might be it might be jokey, but it's got to be something that's in good taste and relevant. So, having said that, you look at my LinkedIn, it's mainly over the last few months been
your dog
dressed up in different outfits because they haven't attracted lots of. It's either a really, really clever social media strategy, or it's not.
Yeah, well, I suppose time will tell, won't it?
It gets a lot of hits, and a lot of people are saying she should have their own Instadog account.
It looks like you started a new trend with that one then. So just for kind of a last thought then, for people who have been made redundant and have lost their job, and they've been looking for, say, a couple of months now, and they're really, really struggling to find that new job or to land that new job, have you got any tips to them to help them get through that, I suppose, difficult job hunt?
Yeah. So I had to think about this and what I would suggest. So I guess it depends on their circumstances. If they're quite junior and they don't yet, for example, have a tax qualification, but they maybe got 18 months to 2 years experience or something like that, I would suggest that they at least enrol to get a qualification. So I would think about, for example, becoming a student member of ATT, so the Association of Tax Technicians, and at least start the process. So it's not that expensive, for example, to do some of the initial exams. So, for example, particularly the ones that you can do online at the moment, like things like the ethics paper, for example. And so that would then show on your CV that you are investing in yourself, and that you really want to proceed and really want a career in tax. If you're already more established, and you are, for example, part qualified, or you've got one qualification, but there's something else you could do. Again, I would say the more qualifications you can get, the better. So, if you're ACA, consider enrolling to do CIO, the CTA and
it's confusing, isn't it, with CTA, because it's CTA qualification, CIOT is the body. Yeah.
International tax look at ADIT. What I'm seeing quite a lot of people, for example, coming out of HMRC who are part ACCA qualified, or people who have done an accountancy and finance degree, then gone into practice. And sometimes as part of your accountancy and finance degree, you effectively get the first 9 papers of ACCA. So you've got like 4 papers left. And I would say go on and do those 4 papers. It might cost you some money, but try and get them. So having a qualification will really help. I would say consider relocating, or consider whether you could commute on a part week basis. So, particularly with the increase of remote working, whether there might be a job out there where you just have to go into the office 1 day a week, and that might broaden the geographical area that you could look at. I would say, depending on your background, you could consider looking at HMRC. HMRC has had a big program over the last couple of years of shutting down small local offices and putting the offices into big city centres. So as a result, they had quite a few people who decided they didn't want to commute, so took voluntary redundancy, and as a result have been quite actively recruiting over the last 2 years. And as you say, with things like the furlough claims and increasing in investigations, HMRC are doing quite a lot of recruitment, and then I would say things like, could you sort of turn it on your head? So could you actually set up your own what you do? Are you experienced enough that you could build your own practice? So I also give people advice on how they do that, which their qualification providers, for example, can provide things like anti-money laundering support, go to get professional indemnity insurance, all of that sort of side of things.
Yeah. Would you say, let's say in a scenario then, if someone has literally had no luck with even getting to interview stage, is it worth having their CV professionally looked at, do you think, as
Yeah,
well? Because could that be...
And I'll always help people with that. That's just something we'll always do. So if somebody comes to us and they've been looking for a while and they haven't had success, then I'll always have a look and see if I can improve their CV for them and sort of talk them through which roles we've got, but also which jobs I think they should apply to directly and how they should go about it. So that's because it is funny. It's the most stupid things sometimes. A candidate will send you a CV and you just think, well, they're clearly bright. They've got all the qualifications. They've got a really good degree. They've got really good A-levels. But there's 2 really bad typos on the first page. And the whole thing axes accuracy. So, it doesn't matter whether you're in compliance or advisory, whether you're in-house or in practice, accuracy is absolutely key to what you do. So if that doesn't come across in your CV, and the thing is, if you've looked at your own CV, lots of times you just miss things.
You do, yeah, absolutely. It's the same with anything you've written yourself, isn't it? Unless you leave it to one side and come back to it a few days later. When you write something that comes straight back to it, it's like, well, you just think everything's perfect, so you kind of just gloss over it almost, don't you? Definitely guilty of that.
We all do it. I see it all the time. I posted something on, I post a job online, and then I'm copying and pasting that part of that job to write my adverts for Tax Advisor, and I realise that there's 3 typos in it, and I think, how did I manage that?
Everyone's human.
Yeah.
Everyone's human. I suppose it's beneficial then to get someone else to have a read of it, isn't it, and spot those things that you've missed yourself.
It's the classic thing, isn't it? I mean, that's why you use a recruiter. It's like, why do you use a tax advisor? Because you don't want to do your own tax return. You want somebody else to.
Yeah.
You don't want to do your own tax advice, and that's exactly the same with the recruiter. It's like a 4 eyes review procedure. Basically, it's having somebody who's a specialist in that area look over what you're doing and make the absolute best of it, basically.
Yeah. So if people wanted to find out more about you and Georgiana Head Recruitment, is there anywhere in particular they can go to?
Well, they can certainly link in with me at Georgiana Head, or they can have a look at my website, which is Georgiana Head Recruitment Limited. And I'm always in the back of Tax Advisor, and quite often writing for Tax Advisor.
Yes, it looks like I'm not the only one with a really long website link.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes 2 of us.
I always called my name, but somebody gave me really good advice when we were setting up in 2007. It was a chap who was the managing partner of Grant Thornton in Manchester, a guy called Graham Whitaker, who sadly now died. But he was a really great guy, and he just said to me, it's got to be your name, because people will put into the search engine Georgiana Head because they know you, and that's what they're looking for. So, and I always feel a bit embarrassed that it's called that rather than tax recruitment.
Yeah.
But it's a way for people to find you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And for me, I just went for something that was completely self-explanatory.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than confuse people. Right, that's great. Thanks, Georgiana. Some really good tips there for people. So thank you very much for coming on. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Some great insights and tips there from Georgiana, and I hope you've been able to take away something useful to help you with your job search. To put the advice into action, you could take on board Georgiana's tips to improve your CV to help increase your chances of getting an interview, and once at interview stage, take on board her tips to help you to properly prepare. For links mentioned in this episode, head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPPX, but replace the X with the episode number, for example, TTPP8 for episode 8. There are also links to Georgiana's vacancy page and to taxation jobs which you may find helpful with your job hunt. Improving your skills will make you more employable and could help you to reduce the risk of redundancy, although I fully appreciate it is unavoidable in some circumstances. You may find other episodes of the podcast helpful in this regard. To see what's available, you can head over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com and head to the podcast section. I intend to add a lot more episodes on improving skills for tax professionals, but at present there are episodes on delegation, productivity, undertaking tax research well, and building tax knowledge. As I say, you can take a listen to these at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com and head over to the podcast section. That's it for this episode. Feel free to get in contact with me either on LinkedIn or through the website if you think I could be of any help with your job search. I'll always be happy to help. Until next time.